Imagine a life where freedom is your birthright, a life filled with family, music, and the quiet joys of everyday work. This was the beginning of Solomon Northup's story, a man born free in New York around 1808. From the moment he took his first steps, Solomon's life was shaped by love, skill, and opportunity, a rare gift for a black man in early 19th century America. Raised in a close-knit family, Solomon learned early the values of hard work, responsibility, and resilience. His father, a man who had once been enslaved but gained freedom through the will of his former master, ensured that Solomon and his siblings grew up with both practical skills and a sense of dignity. In this household, Solomon not only helped with farming and labor, but also discovered a profound talent for music, mastering the violin and finding joy in the harmony of strings and melodies. As he grew older, Solomon's world expanded beyond the fields of his family farm. He married Anne Hampton, a partnership rooted in love and mutual respect, and together they built a life filled with hope and promise. Their home became the center of a growing family, blessed with 3 children. To provide for them, Solomon took on multiple roles. He labored on canals, planted crops, and even performed as a musician, blending his skills with sheer determination to create stability and comfort for his loved ones. Life, as it seemed, was kind. Yet, history often has a way of testing even the strongest spirits. Solomon's story is not only one of freedom and family, it is a tale of resilience, courage, and the unyielding pursuit of justice. It is a reminder that life can change in an instant, and that even the most ordinary days may hold extraordinary trials. Today, we begin a journey into Solomon Northup's life, a story that has inspired countless people around the world through his memoir, 12 Years a Slave. From his early days of freedom in New York to the unimaginable trials he would face after being kidnapped, Solomon's life teaches us about hope, perseverance, and the power of the human spirit. If you want to explore history through the eyes of those who lived it, hear untold stories of courage, and witness the triumph of resilience over adversity, you are in the right place. Make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel, so you never miss another compelling story from the past that continues to shape our present. Let us step into the world of Solomon Northup, a free-born man whose life would soon face trials no one could imagine, but whose courage and determination would leave a legacy that endures to this day. Solomon Northup's life, already marked by the quiet dignity of a free-born upbringing, took on a new dimension with the arrival of Anne Hampton into his world, a woman whose presence brought warmth, partnership, and shared ambition to the household they were building together. Their union was not merely a marriage of convenience or circumstance, but a meeting of minds and hearts, a commitment to create stability and nurture a family in an era when even free black lives were shadowed by uncertainty and the ever-present threat of injustice. From the moment they joined their lives, Solomon and Anne embarked on a journey that intertwined the everyday routines of survival with the delicate weaving of dreams for the future. A tapestry stitched with both toil and tender care, where the laughter of children mingled with the rhythm of labor and the melodies of Solomon's violin. As their family grew to include 3 children, Solomon understood that fatherhood demanded more than presence. It demanded sacrificial commitment and relentless determination. He assumed responsibilities that extended far beyond what might be expected of any man of his time, particularly one who, though free, had to navigate a society still deeply unequal. Each day brought a balancing act, a choreography of labor and skill, as he moved between diverse occupations that required both physical endurance and mental acuity. During the mornings, he would often be found working on the Champlain Canal, cutting through timber, and attending to the demands of the land that his father once cultivated, a tangible link to his family's legacy of diligence and resilience. Here, Amid the frost of winter mornings and the heat of the laborious seasons, Solomon's body and spirit were tempered in ways that would later become vital to his endurance in far harsher circumstances. Yet, Solomon was not solely a man of toil. Music had long been a refuge and an expression of identity, a thread that connected him to joy, creativity, and culture. With his violin in hand, he transformed moments of rest into performances that uplifted the spirits of his family and community. And, over time, these musical skills became a modest but meaningful source of income. He would often travel short distances to play at gatherings or events, each note resonating not only with melody but with the silent assertion of dignity and freedom. A subtle defiance against a world that frequently sought to marginalize those like him. These performances were more than entertainment. They were a statement of presence, skill, and cultural richness, a reminder that Solomon's identity could not be confined to labor alone, that his humanity encompassed artistry, intellect, and a profound love for life itself. Amid this demanding routine, Anne played an indispensable role, providing stability, nurturing their children, and contributing to the household's sustenance. She took up employment of her own, often in cooking and domestic work, blending her responsibilities with unwavering care for the family's emotional and physical well-being. Together, Solomon and Anne formed a partnership that was both practical and deeply supportive, a collaboration that allowed them to weather the uncertainties of life, while maintaining a home filled with learning, music, and love. Their children grew up in an environment where work and creativity were seamlessly intertwined, where discipline was tempered with encouragement, and where the foundations of respect, empathy, and resilience were instilled from the earliest years. The family's life, however, was not without challenges. Each opportunity Solomon pursued required careful judgment, as he navigated a society that, despite his legal freedom, was fraught with danger and deceit. His commitment to his family often meant long hours, physical exhaustion, and the constant search for ways to provide stability and opportunity. Yet, in these moments of exertion and uncertainty, Solomon's resolve was strengthened rather than diminished. As he recognized that the stakes were far greater than personal comfort, they encompassed the safety, education, and future of his children, the preservation of the dignity of his household, and the continuity of a legacy built by his father and extended through his own labor and care. In this period of his life, Solomon's story reflects the interconnectedness of freedom, responsibility, and the pursuit of a meaningful life. Every day was a negotiation between survival and aspiration, between the demands of labor and the nurturing of spirit, between the immediate needs of a household and the long-term dreams for children yet to grow into adulthood. His violin became both a symbol and a tool, bridging the world of work and the world of art, offering not only income but a reminder of creativity, an identity that could not be erased. The mornings spent in fields and canals, the afternoons dedicated to carpentry or farm labor, and the evenings filled with music and family gatherings wove together a life that was rich, challenging, and profoundly human, a testament to the resilience, intelligence, and dedication that would later define Solomon in even harsher circumstances. Through these years, Solomon and Anne built more than a home. They built a foundation of hope, discipline, and love, one that prepared them, unknowingly, for the unimaginable trials that would soon follow. The careful cultivation of skills, the dedication to family, and the nurturing of creativity all became part of Solomon's armor, equipping him not only to survive but to preserve a sense of identity and humanity under conditions that would later test the limits of endurance. This chapter of his life, often overlooked in retellings focused solely on his years of enslavement, is crucial. for it shows a man deeply committed to family and self-expression, a man whose ordinary acts of care, diligence, and artistry would form the invisible threads of resilience that carried him through 12 years of unimaginable suffering. Solomon Northup's early family life, therefore, is not simply a backdrop to his later ordeal. It is a vital narrative of preparation, character, and love, a story of a man who, even in ordinary circumstances, demonstrated extraordinary dedication and foresight. It is here, in the fields, homes, and musical interludes of his New York life, that the essence of Solomon's courage begins to take shape, revealing the depth of character that would sustain him through the darkest chapters of his journey, and leaving a timeless lesson that love, skill, and steadfast commitment to family are among the most powerful forces a human being can cultivate. By 1841, Solomon Northup had carved out a life of relative stability and modest prosperity. His days woven with the threads of labor, music, and family devotion. Yet even amidst this carefully cultivated routine, the world beyond his home carried perils that would soon upend everything he held dear. At the age of 32, a man seasoned by years of responsibility and the delicate balancing of work, family, and artistry, Solomon encountered two men who seemed, at first glance, to offer an opportunity as promising as it was exciting. An offer that would, unknowingly to him, set in motion a chain of events that would alter the course of his life forever. These men presented themselves as patrons of his musical talents, proposing a chance for Solomon to perform in Washington, a city distant from his familiar streets and fields, yet ripe with the allure of professional recognition and financial reward. The invitation, framed with assurances of ease and legitimacy, appealed to both his ambition as a musician and his practical sense of supporting a growing family, for the promise of fair compensation and a brief journey seemed, to Solomon, an entirely reasonable proposition, trusting in the good faith of strangers, a trust nurtured by a lifetime where honesty and integrity had been the foundation of his interactions. Solomon accepted the offer. He made preparations for the journey with the careful attention of a man who understood responsibility. Yet there was no hint in his calculations of the danger that loomed. Leaving his wife, Anne, and their children behind, unaware of the true nature of the men who had approached him, he embarked on what he believed would be a short and profitable excursion, a chance to showcase his skills to a wider audience, and perhaps bring honor and additional means to his household. He carried with him not only his violin, an extension of his very identity, but also papers certifying his status as a free man, documents that under any ordinary circumstance would have secured his safety and affirmed his rights. Yet in this moment, they would prove tragically insufficient. The journey to Washington unfolded with a deceptive air of normalcy. The roads he traveled were familiar enough in their landscapes to suggest nothing sinister. Yet each mile took him further from the protective familiarity of home and deeper into a world where freedom could be questioned, manipulated, and denied. The men, Murrell Brown and Abraham Hamilton, presented themselves with courtesy and outward civility, allaying any suspicions Solomon might have harbored. Their conversation, their gestures, and the apparent professionalism of their arrangements created a convincing illusion of security, a mirage of opportunity designed to obscure the cruel intentions that lay beneath. It is a sobering reminder that deception often wears the face of civility, that even the most cautious and conscientious individuals may be ensnared by those who understand how to exploit trust and ambition. As the journey progressed, the subtle warnings that might have prompted hesitation were easily overlooked in the excitement of potential success and the human tendency to see the world through the lens of experience rather than treachery. Solomon, like many before and after him, could not have imagined that the same society that recognized his freedom on paper could simultaneously harbor networks of men who specialized in abducting free black citizens, men who preyed upon opportunity, proximity, and trust to satisfy the insatiable demand for labor in distant southern plantations. Washington, at this time, was notorious not only for its political significance but also for its prominence in the business of slavery, a city where kidnappers and slave traders operated with alarming efficiency, targeting those like Solomon who were vulnerable despite their legal protections. The men's intentions became horrifyingly clear only after the point of no return. Solomon, unaware of the fate awaiting him, had already left the protective bounds of New York, his mind focused on the promise of work, his heart longing to provide for his family, and his hands poised to draw music from his violin for appreciative audiences. The contrast between expectation and reality could not have been starker. A simple journey intended to display talent and earn sustenance transformed into the first chapter of a 12-year ordeal that would test the very limits of human endurance and spirit. In the span of a single trip, Solomon was moved from a place of freedom, respect, and familial love to a landscape dominated by deception, coercion, and a systematic denial of his rights, an abrupt rupture that underscores how fragile liberty could be for free black individuals in antebellum America. Despite the shock and betrayal, Solomon's prior life, the foundation of resilience, skill, and careful judgment he had built over decades, remained a silent ally. His ability to assess situation, to perform under pressure, and to maintain composure in the face of uncertainty would later serve as tools of survival, even as his world contracted into one defined by captivity and cruelty. The trust he placed in the wrong individuals, a trust born of a lifetime guided by integrity, became a lesson in vigilance, a painful but essential understanding of the dangers posed by those who manipulate appearances to achieve sinister ends. Each step of this ill-fated journey emphasized the tension between hope and treachery, between ambition and the cruel realities imposed by a society that commodified human lives, and in retrospect, illuminates the peril inherent in the intersection of freedom, trust, and systemic injustice. As Solomon crossed state lines, unknowingly moving closer to the clutches of men who would treat him as property rather than a person, the narrative of his life shifted dramatically. What had begun as an opportunity for artistic expression and familial provision became the gateway into a harrowing struggle for survival, a test of spirit, courage, and resilience that would define his legacy for generations to come. The deception of 1841 was not a mere anecdote in a biography. It was a turning point, a dramatic pivot from the ordinary joys of family and work into the extraordinary trials that would follow. Yet it was also the moment that highlighted Solomon's essential qualities: his intelligence, his foresight, and his capacity for endurance, which would ultimately carry him through unimaginable adversity. Thus, the journey to Washington, under the pretense of a musical engagement, stands as a defining moment in Solomon Northup's life, a story of trust, ambition, and the cruel manipulation of innocence. And it serves as the threshold from which a remarkable tale of resilience, ingenuity, and the pursuit of freedom would unfold, a narrative that continues to inspire and educate nearly 2 centuries later. By the time Solomon Northup arrived in Washington, the city's grandeur and bustle masked a dark undercurrent that would soon engulf him entirely, transforming what had begun as an opportunity for growth and performance into a nightmare of captivity. The streets, lined with the trappings of government and commerce, concealed the ever-present threat that free black men like Solomon faced, a reality that was as invisible to him at the outset as it was inevitable. It was here, in the midst of the city's seeming civility, that the 2 men who had invited him under the guise of a musical engagement revealed the sinister purpose behind their polite words and feigned assurances. The deception was swift and calculated, executed with the kind of precision that only those familiar with the darker practices of the era could muster. Solomon, despite carrying papers that unequivocally demonstrated his free-born status, found himself stripped of autonomy, thrust into a world where the proof of liberty held no power against the greed and malice of those who trafficked in human lives. The moment of betrayal was both shocking and surreal. Solomon, whose life until that point had been marked by responsibility, skill, and the pursuit of a modest prosperity, suddenly confronted the incomprehensible reality that freedom could be nullified by the mere assertion of power by those who sought to profit from it. His identity, legally recognized and personally affirmed, became irrelevant in the face of a society that commodified black bodies, reducing a man of intelligence, creativity, and familial devotion to an object to be bought and sold. The sheer audacity of the act, the kidnapping of a free man who had done nothing to warrant such treatment, illustrates the precariousness of freedom for black Americans at the time and the pervasive threat that could strike even those living ostensibly secure lives in the North. Once in the hands of the traffickers, Solomon's world contracted to the immediate realities of subjugation and control. The men who orchestrated his capture moved with deliberate efficiency, transporting him to James Birch, a slave trader who operated with the merciless pragmatism of someone accustomed to dealing in human lives as if they were commodities rather than people. The transition from liberty to bondage was abrupt. There was no time to process the enormity of the betrayal, no opportunity to resist in any meaningful way. His papers, which under ordinary circumstances should have guaranteed safety, were dismissed, ignored, or perhaps even deliberately overlooked, illustrating the cruel indifference of a system that placed profit above justice and legal recognition above morality. Solomon, a man who had devoted his life to family, labor, and art, was suddenly forced into a reality where the rules of his previous existence held no sway, and where survival required immediate adaptation to a world of fear, obedience, and unpredictability. The sale to James Birch marked the formal beginning of Solomon's 12-year ordeal, a period defined by physical labor, psychological torment, and the constant struggle to maintain a sense of self amid relentless dehumanization. Birch, like many slave traders of the period, treated the acquisition as a transaction devoid of human empathy, valuing Solomon only insofar as he could be exploited for profit. The documentation of freedom, the life lived in New York, the skills cultivated over decades, all were irrelevant in the eyes of men who saw people as assets and liabilities rather than individuals with histories, families, and intrinsic worth. Solomon's predicament underscores the brutal efficiency of the slave trade, a system capable of erasing identity and autonomy in the blink of an eye, leaving a man of talent and principle to navigate a world constructed entirely against him. Within the confines of Birch's ownership, Solomon was subjected to a routine designed to enforce submission and erase the remnants of freedom. The work was grueling, the oversight constant, and the punishments for perceived transgressions severe. Yet even in these moments of extreme adversity, Solomon's inner resources, his intelligence, his endurance, and his prior experiences of responsibility and self-discipline provided a foundation upon which he could maintain some semblance of dignity and agency. Each day became a test not only of physical stamina but of psychological resilience, as he learned to navigate the unpredictable temperaments of those who wielded power over his life, to anticipate cruelty, and to identify moments where initiative could preserve health, safety, at the very least, a sense of identity that could not be entirely extinguished. Despite the immediate dangers, Solomon's mind remained acutely aware of the broader injustice, a consciousness sharpened by the knowledge that he was innocent of any crime and that his freedom had been violated through deceit. The contrast between the life he had built in New York with family, work, and music and the circumstances in which he now found himself could not have been more stark. And it imbued every action with urgency. Survival became a multifaceted challenge. To endure the labor, to withstand the psychological assaults, to guard against despair, and, critically, to seek opportunities, however rare, to communicate with the outside world or to assert his true identity in the hope that recognition and intervention might one day restore him to liberty. The initial days and weeks under Birch's control were especially harrowing. As Solomon grappled with the shock of betrayal and the sudden transformation of his world, the stark awareness that documents, reputation, and personal history could be rendered meaningless by the predatory systems of the time emphasized the vulnerability inherent in his situation. Yet it also revealed the necessity of cunning, patience, and strategy. Every interaction became laden with significance. Every gesture, every word spoken or withheld, could carry consequences for survival. Solomon's experience illustrates not only the personal horror of being kidnapped, but also the systemic cruelty of a society that enabled such acts with impunity, where law and morality could be circumvented by wealth, power, and the merciless logic of commerce. Through this period, the contrast between Solomon's prior life and his captivity became ever more poignant, highlighting the magnitude of what had been taken from him: freedom, family, and the ability to live under the recognition of law and humanity. Yet within this stark and oppressive reality, the seeds of resilience, intelligence, and foresight developed through years of labor. Artistic pursuit and family responsibility continued to grow. They became the silent allies that would sustain him in the months and years to come, enabling him to navigate a world designed to suppress not only his body but also his spirit. Solomon Northup's kidnapping in Washington, despite clear proof of his free status, serves as a harrowing testament to both the cruelty of the slave trade and the fragility of liberty for Black Americans in antebellum society. And it sets the stage for a narrative of endurance, strategy, and eventual triumph that continues to resonate across generations as a story of courage, dignity, and unyielding hope. After Solomon Northup's harrowing capture in Washington, his life became a relentless odyssey through the cruel and unforgiving landscape of American slavery, a world in which every day demanded endurance, intelligence, and an almost unimaginable degree of resilience. The 12 years that followed were defined by a cycle of labor, oppression, and the ever-present threat of physical violence, a period that would see him transferred, sold, or leased to multiple masters, each embodying the complex and often contradictory nature of power, authority, and human morality within the plantation system. While some masters offered occasional reprieve or even moments of relative decency, the overarching reality of Solomon's existence was one of exploitation, subjugation, and the persistent need to navigate a society structured to strip him of his identity and agency. Solomon's first experiences under James Birch, the man who purchased him after his abduction, quickly established the brutal rhythm of plantation life and the precariousness of existence as a man considered property. The transition from freedom to bondage had been sudden, and the initial period was dominated by disorientation, fear, and the necessity of adjusting to a life dictated entirely by others. The daily toil demanded endurance beyond the ordinary, as physical labor was relentless and often accompanied by punishments designed not only to maintain obedience but also to break spirit. Yet Solomon, drawing on the strength, skills, and discipline that had marked his free life, sought to preserve his identity, to find methods of coping, and to identify any opportunity for assertion of self or eventual liberation. It was during these early months that he began to understand the intricacies of the system, the roles of overseers, the subtleties of power, and the strategies that might protect him from the worst excesses of cruelty. His transfer to William Ford, a Baptist preacher who also managed a plantation in Louisiana, marked a subtle shift in his experience of enslavement. Ford, unlike Birch, exhibited a measure of humanity and sometimes even leniency, granting Solomon conditions that were comparatively less harsh. While the labor remained arduous, the environment allowed for the occasional exercise of skill, intellect, and initiative. Solomon's talents as a carpenter and farmer became assets, and he was able to contribute in ways that enhanced both the plantation's productivity and his own sense of purpose, even under the constant weight of subjugation. Yet this relative reprieve did not erase the reality that he was still a man whose life was bought and sold, a person denied basic rights, whose family lay far beyond his reach, and whose daily existence was governed by the whims and economic needs of others. The tenuous stability under Ford ended when financial difficulties forced the sale of Solomon and other enslaved individuals. It was during this period that he fell into the hands of John Thibault, a carpenter to whom Ford owed debts, and the nature of his bondage shifted once again into a harsher, more arbitrary regime. Thibault's treatment was cruel, characterized by severe physical punishment and a capricious exercise of authority that made every day a test of endurance and vigilance. Solomon's life under Thibault exemplified the peril inherent in the system, where the economic calculations of owners and creditors could dictate human suffering, and where the moral inclinations of one master could be quickly superseded by the greed or necessity of another. Despite the physical abuse and psychological strain, Solomon maintained a careful awareness of his surroundings, learning to anticipate danger, to navigate interpersonal dynamics, and to conserve strength for the inevitable challenges that would follow. Eventually, Solomon was sold to Edwin Epps, a man whose cruelty became infamous, and whose plantation became the stage for some of the most grueling years of Solomon's enslavement. Under Epps, the physical demands intensified, the oversight became more arbitrary, and the punishments for even minor perceived infractions were severe and unrelenting. Daily life involved long hours in the fields, the relentless heat of Louisiana, and the constant presence of threats designed to reinforce dominance and subjugation. The environment was both physically and psychologically taxing. Yet Solomon, drawing on an extraordinary inner resilience, endured, relying upon his intelligence, prior skills, and a growing awareness of the necessity of strategic patience to survive. In these years, Solomon also formed bonds with other enslaved individuals, sharing in the small acts of solidarity, camaraderie, and subtle resistance that allowed him to maintain a sense of humanity amidst overwhelming oppression. Throughout these 12 years, the experience of being sold or leased to different masters not only imposed physical hardships but also forced Solomon to navigate a complex social and economic landscape that sought to erase his autonomy. Each new master presented a unique challenge, requiring adaptation, observation, and the careful assessment of risk. While moments of relative kindness under Ford or small victories in skill-based labor offered brief respites, the overarching pattern was one of exploitation and control, a reminder that the freedom he once knew in New York had been violently and systematically denied. The contrast between his former life and the conditions he endured underscored both the fragility of liberty for Black Americans in this period and the remarkable endurance required to survive such relentless adversity. Even as the years wore on, Solomon's mind remained alert to the possibility of liberation, to opportunities for communication, and to the preservation of his identity and dignity. He was acutely aware that any misstep could result in punishment, yet he also understood that resilience, observation, and judicious action could provide small but critical protections. His story during this period is not only one of suffering but also of remarkable human strength, illustrating the ways in which a man could endure extreme adversity while retaining hope, intelligence, and a sense of self. Solomon Northup's 12 years of bondage under Birch, Ford, Taboo, and Epps reveal a continuum of oppression, a tapestry of experiences that range from constrained leniency to outright cruelty. Each chapter underscoring the human cost of slavery and the resilience required to survive it. His endurance across these years, his ability to adapt and persevere, and his unwavering hope of returning to freedom stand as a testament to the extraordinary courage and fortitude of a man whose story would eventually illuminate the injustices of an entire system and inspire generations to understand, reflect, and remember. Throughout Solomon Northup's 12-year ordeal under the brutal yoke of slavery, the physical and psychological trials he endured were relentless, yet they became the crucible in which his extraordinary resilience and determination were forged. From the moment he was forcibly removed from the freedom of his home in New York and thrust into the merciless hands of slave traders and plantation owners, Solomon's life was defined by a constant confrontation with danger, exploitation, and cruelty. The work demanded of him was exhausting beyond ordinary comprehension, involving backbreaking labor in the cotton fields, arduous construction projects, and tasks designed to extract every ounce of strength from his body while simultaneously suppressing any expression of individuality or defiance. Each day presented new challenges, from the punishing heat and grueling physical demands to the omnipresent threat of beatings for the slightest perceived infraction. Yet Solomon's mind and spirit, cultivated through years of disciplined work, artistic expression, and familial responsibility, provided a foundation for enduring the unimaginable. The beatings he suffered were often arbitrary, meted out not as a response to genuine transgression but as a demonstration of power, a chilling reminder that his humanity was systematically denied. Overseers and masters such as John Tebow and Edwin Epps wielded authority with a combination of calculated cruelty and impulsive rage, ensuring that submission was enforced at all costs. Solomon learned, through painful experience, that survival required more than mere physical endurance. It demanded a careful observation of human behavior, an ability to anticipate the whims of those in power, and a disciplined restraint that allowed him to endure indignities without yielding to despair. The psychological toll of this environment was immense. Yet Solomon clung to the knowledge that he was a free man by birth, a fact that remained both a source of profound injustice and a beacon of hope, reminding him that the bondage imposed upon him was neither legitimate nor permanent. Amidst the harshest labor and the threat of violence, Solomon also had to navigate life-threatening situations that tested his courage and presence of mind. There were moments when the actions of others, whether masters, overseers, or fellow enslaved individuals, could result in injury or death, and Solomon learned to assess risks with the precision of someone whose survival depended entirely on foresight and quick thinking. The precariousness of each day instilled in him a constant awareness of mortality. Yet it also reinforced his resolve to reclaim the freedom that had been stolen from him, even in moments of severe illness, such as during outbreaks of disease aboard ships or within the plantations themselves. Solomon drew upon his inner strength, enduring pain and weakness while maintaining a focus on the ultimate goal of liberation. Despite the harsh conditions, Solomon's intellect and ingenuity remained vital tools in his struggle to survive. His skills as a carpenter, farmer, and musician allowed him occasional leverage and small moments of agency within a system designed to deny him both. For instance, constructing rafts to transport lumber, assisting in the management of plantation tasks, and performing in limited social settings offered opportunities to demonstrate competence and secure minor protections, all while subtly reinforcing the sense of self that slavery sought to obliterate. These activities, though undertaken under caution, provided both practical advantages and psychological sustenance, reinforcing his belief that survival was possible and that freedom remained a tangible goal, Even if distant and uncertain, Solomon's enduring hope was nurtured by human connections forged in the crucible of slavery, as he found allies among those who, whether from moral conviction or strategic interest, treated him with relative kindness and provided opportunities to communicate with the outside world. One such figure was Michael Bass, a Canadian carpenter whose abolitionist sympathies allowed Solomon to confide in him, ultimately enabling a correspondence that would lead to his rescue. These relationships were lifelines, demonstrating that even within the confines of oppression, human empathy and solidarity could create openings for justice and redemption. The presence of these allies, however rare and fragile, strengthened Solomon's resolve, reminding him that his suffering was not unnoticed and that the principles of fairness and human dignity, though suppressed, had not been extinguished. Throughout the ordeal, Solomon faced relentless psychological strain, as the uncertainty of his fate weighed upon him daily. He knew that the recognition of his freeborn status was dependent upon documentation and intervention, both of which seemed distant and improbable amidst the remorseless machinery of the slave system. Yet he persisted, carefully observing, remembering, and waiting for opportunities to assert his identity without imperiling his life. His determination to survive was not merely physical. It was an unwavering commitment to preserve his selfhood, maintain hope, and prepare for the eventual restoration of liberty. This mental fortitude, cultivated under extreme duress, became as crucial as the endurance of his body, providing a framework within which he could endure brutality while envisioning a return to family, community, and self-determination. Solomon's experience illuminates the dual nature of slavery as both a system of physical coercion and psychological domination, illustrating how those in bondage were compelled to navigate a landscape of fear, exploitation, and constant threat. Yet within this landscape, Solomon's resilience demonstrates the capacity for human determination to endure even the most oppressive conditions. Each act of survival, whether enduring harsh labor, withstanding beatings, or strategically engaging with allies, was a step toward reclaiming his life and affirming his intrinsic worth against a society intent on denying it. His story is a testament to the power of perseverance, the necessity of hope, and the enduring strength of the human spirit in the face of systematic injustice. In the crucible of 12 years under relentless oppression, Solomon Northup exemplified extraordinary courage, resourcefulness, and unwavering resolve. The severe physical abuse, unending labor, and life-threatening situations he confronted were constant reminders of the fragility of freedom for Black Americans in antebellum society. Yet through it all, he remained steadfast, ever determined to survive and ultimately reclaim the liberty that was rightfully his, a testament to the resilience and indomitable spirit that would define his remarkable journey back to freedom. Amidst the relentless hardships of plantation life under Edwin Epps, a slaver notorious for his cruelty, Solomon Northup's days were marked by endless toil, danger, and a persistent gnawing hope for freedom that seemed almost impossible to grasp. The oppressive heat of the Louisiana sun bore down on him and his fellow laborers as they worked in the cotton fields. Their hands blistered, their backs aching, their spirits tested in ways that no man born free should ever endure. And yet Solomon's mind remained alert, searching for even the smallest opportunities to reclaim a measure of control over his life, to preserve the fragile threads of his identity, and to connect with the world beyond the iron grip of slavery. It was in this environment of ceaseless labor and constant threat that Solomon's path crossed with Michael Bass, a Canadian carpenter whose presence would become a turning point in the long, painful narrative of his captivity. Michael Bass was unlike the other men who moved through the plantation, indifferent to the suffering surrounding them or actively complicit in the cruelty that defined the daily existence of enslaved people. He was a man who, through personal conviction and perhaps an innate sense of justice, viewed Solomon and others not merely as laboring bodies but as human beings with stories, memories, and rights that had been violently stripped from them. Solomon, cautious and wary from years of brutal treatment and betrayals, observed Bass carefully, discerning the glimmer of kindness and understanding behind his practical demeanor. Slowly, through small acts of shared work, conversations, and the subtle exchange of trust, Solomon began to confide in Bass, revealing the truth about his origins, his free status, and the circumstances that had led to his abduction from New York 12 years earlier. This was no casual disclosure. For Solomon, opening his heart to another person carried immense risk. The system of slavery instilled an enduring fear, as disclosure of free-born status or attempts to seek assistance could provoke brutal punishment or even death. Yet, Solomon recognized an ally whose moral compass and practical capability could transform whispered hope into concrete action. He recounted, carefully and deliberately, the details of his capture, the unscrupulous methods used to transport him south, the sequence of sales and leases that had subjected him to the whims of multiple masters, and the constant danger that had shadowed him through the years. Bass listened attentively, absorbing the narrative of suffering, endurance, and latent defiance. And when Solomon entrusted him with the knowledge necessary to facilitate communication with the outside world, Bass took on a role that would become vital to the ultimate restoration of Solomon's freedom. Understanding the importance of clear and actionable information, Bass agreed to assist Solomon in sending letters that would reach friends and family who might help orchestrate his liberation. They devised a careful strategy. Letters were composed with precision, detailing Solomon's current location, the conditions of his enslavement, and the identity of the plantation master in a manner that could withstand scrutiny yet provide enough information to catalyze rescue efforts. Every word carried weight, as a single mistake could compromise the entire plan. Yet Bass's reliability and understanding of the risks involved provided Solomon with a rare sense of hope, a fragile but tangible link to a world from which he had been violently severed for more than a decade. Solomon's letters reached the hands of Henry Northup, a family acquaintance and the son of the man who had once owned Solomon's father, and also deeply connected to the network that could verify Solomon's free status. Henry, understanding both the urgency and the legal complexities involved, immediately took action, contacting the governor of New York and mobilizing legal representatives who could navigate the bureaucracy necessary to confront the illegal sale and abduction. Bass's role in this process was instrumental. Without his trustworthiness and his willingness to act as an intermediary, the chain of communication might have faltered, leaving Solomon trapped in the oppressive confines of the Louisiana plantation indefinitely. This alliance between Solomon and Bass was a profound example of how individual courage and moral conviction could intersect with systemic injustice to create a pathway toward liberation. Bass risked his reputation, and potentially his safety, to assist a man who had been deemed property by law yet retained an unassailable claim to freedom by birthright. Their collaboration required patience, discretion, and careful negotiation, as any misstep could have resulted in immediate retribution by Edwin Epps or the plantation overseers. Solomon's ability to identify Bass as an ally, to trust him, and to effectively communicate his plight, demonstrates a combination of insight, resilience, and strategic thinking that had been honed over 12 years of survival under extraordinary duress. Even as the plan for rescue took shape, Solomon continued to fulfill his duties under the constant oversight of Epps, concealing the hope that had been rekindled within him, maintaining a facade of compliance while mentally preparing for the possibility of freedom. The letters sent through Bass became lifelines, each postmark carrying the potential to bridge the vast distance between bondage and liberty, between despair and the rekindling of a life once thought irretrievably lost. Through this process, Solomon's story illustrates not only the horrors of slavery but also the enduring human capacity to seek justice. Cultivate alliances and maintain hope against formidable odds. In the narrative of Solomon Northup, Michael Bass stands as a critical figure whose empathy, courage, and practical action transformed years of oppression into the possibility of liberation. Their collaboration underscores the importance of trust, moral responsibility, and strategic action in the face of systemic injustice, demonstrating that even within the most oppressive circumstances, human connection can be a catalyst for profound change. It was through Bass' assistance that Solomon's path to freedom began in earnest, a journey that would ultimately restore him to his family, allow him to reclaim his rightful identity, and enable him to bear witness to the atrocities he endured, ensuring that his story would resonate far beyond the confines of his immediate experience, illuminating the resilience and indomitable spirit of a man who refused to be defined by the chains imposed upon him. After years of unimaginable hardship and relentless toil under the merciless conditions of slavery, Solomon Northup's story finally began to bend toward justice, propelled by a combination of careful planning, courageous allies, and legal advocacy that spanned the distance from the cotton fields of Louisiana to the halls of power in New York. The letters that Solomon had entrusted to Michael Bass served as the critical lifeline, connecting his perilous present to the world that had once been his home, each carefully composed message carrying the precise details necessary to guide those who sought to rescue him. Bass, recognizing the gravity of the situation and the importance of accuracy, ensured that every piece of correspondence conveyed Solomon's location, the identity of his enslaver Edwin Epps, and the intricate circumstances of his abduction, creating a clear path for intervention that could not be ignored. This delicate act of communication, executed under constant surveillance and threat of discovery, represented both a practical step toward liberation and a profound act of faith in the possibility of human justice prevailing over systemic cruelty. Once these letters reached the hands of Henry Northup, a trusted family acquaintance and the son of the man who had once owned Solomon's father, the wheels of formal legal action began to turn with a precision born of urgency and moral conviction. Henry understood the immense challenges posed by a system that had permitted and even encouraged Solomon's abduction. Recognizing that without immediate and decisive legal intervention, the efforts of Bass and the letters themselves might not be sufficient to secure Solomon's freedom. Drawing upon both personal connections and the authority vested in governmental structures, Henry coordinated with the governor of New York, who, upon understanding the details of Solomon's plight, authorized legal agents to pursue the case with all the procedural tools at their disposal. The combination of personal advocacy and official authority created a formidable force capable of confronting the entrenched mechanisms of slavery and its perpetrators, and it underscored the importance of strategy, diligence, and persistence in seeking justice for those wrongfully imprisoned. The process of organizing Solomon's rescue was complex, requiring the careful compilation of affidavits and documentation to verify his status as a free-born citizen, a task complicated by the passage of time, the geographic distance separating him from New York, and the reluctance or outright hostility of those who had profited from his forced labor. Yet, through the meticulous efforts of Henry Northup, the governor's legal team, and the steadfast cooperation of Bass, sufficient evidence was gathered to challenge the claims of ownership asserted by Edwin Epps, demonstrating that the man held in bondage was in fact entitled to freedom by birthright. These legal preparations were not merely bureaucratic formalities. They were a lifeline and a shield, providing the tangible proof required to compel the compliance of those who had unlawfully detained Solomon for more than a decade. Each document, each sworn statement, and each letter sent and received contributed incrementally to a framework capable of restoring Solomon's autonomy, highlighting the critical role of organized, principled intervention in the pursuit of justice within an unjust system. When the agents of the law finally arrived in Louisiana, their intervention marked the culmination of years of careful orchestration and quiet heroism, a dramatic intersection of human perseverance and institutional authority. Solomon, who had lived under the constant threat of violence and degradation, was presented with the documentation that affirmed his status as a free man, and the weight of years spent in captivity began to lift as the legal claim to his personhood was recognized and enforced. Edwin Epps, confronted with incontrovertible proof and aware that no court would support his continued assertion of ownership, ultimately conceded, releasing Solomon from the bonds that had for so long defined and constrained his life. This moment, at once legal and profoundly human, represented the triumph of justice, determination, and the enduring principle that freedom, though delayed and obstructed, could not be permanently denied to those whose claim to it was just. Solomon's reunion with his family in New York was both a literal and symbolic restoration of the life that had been violently interrupted. The emotional gravity of these first moments cannot be overstated. After 12 years of separation, filled with uncertainty, anguish, and the constant struggle for survival, Solomon returned to the embrace of his wife Anne and their 3 children, re-establishing the bonds that had been severed by betrayal and human cruelty. The reunion was a testament to the enduring power of familial love and the unyielding hope that had sustained him throughout his ordeal, demonstrating that even in the darkest circumstances, the human spirit retains the capacity to endure, to hope, and ultimately to reclaim what is rightfully its own. The restoration of these personal connections reinforced the broader moral victory of his rescue, serving as a poignant reminder that the impact of freedom extends beyond the individual to encompass those whose lives are intertwined with theirs, creating ripples of renewal and restoration that resonate far beyond a single moment. Solomon's liberation in 1853 did not simply mark the end of personal suffering. It became the foundation for a broader mission of storytelling, advocacy, and social consciousness. Once reunited with his family, he undertook the monumental task of documenting his experiences, collaborating with writer and lawyer David Wilson to produce his memoir, 12 Years a Slave, in which he meticulously recounted the physical, emotional, and psychological trials endured during his captivity. The book, completed in an extraordinary span of 3 months, provided an unflinching narrative of the horrors of slavery, the resilience required to survive, and the complex interplay of cruelty and occasional compassion within the plantation system. By sharing his story, Solomon transformed his personal journey into a powerful tool for social awareness, giving voice to countless others whose suffering remained unrecorded and challenging readers to confront the stark realities of systemic injustice. The rescue of Solomon Northup exemplifies the interconnection of courage, strategy, and moral conviction, illustrating how determined advocacy, informed legal action, and the willingness of principled individuals can converge to overturn profound injustice. The letters sent through Michael Bass, the tireless efforts of Henry Northup, and the intervention of the governor of New York collectively demonstrate that freedom, while often obstructed by entrenched systems of power, can be reclaimed through persistence, collaboration, and the unwavering belief in the righteousness of one's cause. Solomon's story, culminating in his liberation and reunion with family, underscores not only the resilience of an individual, but also the critical role that networks of support and moral responsibility play in achieving justice. In the broader narrative of American history, Solomon Northup's rescue stands as a vivid testament to the triumph of human determination, legal advocacy, and moral courage over the oppressive forces of slavery. And his return to freedom in 1853 remains a defining moment in the fight for recognition, justice, and human dignity, reminding us that even in the face of the most enduring adversity, liberation is attainable through courage, tenacity, and unwavering hope. After regaining his freedom and reuniting with his family, Solomon Northup faced the formidable task of transforming 12 years of unimaginable suffering into a narrative that could educate, move, and awaken the moral consciousness of a nation. He understood that his experiences were not merely personal tragedies but reflections of a systemic injustice that continued to affect countless lives, and he resolved to ensure that the brutal reality of slavery would be documented with unflinching honesty, careful precision, and a compelling narrative force capable of reaching beyond his immediate circumstances. To accomplish this, Solomon partnered with David Wilson, a skilled writer and lawyer who helped him shape the raw details of his life into a structured, readable, and powerful account, ensuring that the story retained both its factual integrity and emotional resonance. The collaboration allowed Solomon to convey the chronology of his life from his upbringing as a free-born man in New York, through his abduction, the harrowing years under multiple masters, the friendships and alliances that aided his survival, to his eventual rescue in a manner that drew readers into the lived experience of a man who had been violently torn from freedom and forced into bondage. The memoir, eventually published under the title 12 Years a Slave, achieved remarkable success, not merely as a work of literature but as a historical document and a vehicle for social advocacy. Solomon recounted in painstaking detail the conditions of the plantations where he labored, describing the relentless physical demands, the constant threat of violence, and the daily indignities imposed upon enslaved people. He narrated the cruelty of masters such as Edwin Epps, whose punishments were brutal and arbitrary, alongside moments of relative mercy offered by others like William Ford, illustrating the complex spectrum of human behavior within a system designed to dehumanize. Solomon's narrative did not shy away from the psychological toll of slavery, the fear, the uncertainty, and the constant suppression of identity and dignity, but also highlighted the resilience, ingenuity, and courage required to survive in such an environment, offering a multidimensional portrait of life under oppression. In addition to chronicling the hardships of bondage, Solomon's memoir explored the legal and social mechanisms that allowed slavery to persist, exposing the ease with which free-born men could be abducted and sold into servitude, and the failures of institutions to protect their rights. By detailing his own kidnapping, the complicity of opportunistic intermediaries, and the bureaucratic and legal challenges faced during his eventual rescue, Solomon illuminated the systemic vulnerabilities that endangered countless individuals. He described the painstaking efforts of Michael Bass to transmit letters, the vigilance of Henry Northup and the governor of New York in mobilizing legal action, and the delicate negotiation required to secure his release, providing readers with a clear understanding of the interplay between individual initiative and institutional response in the pursuit of justice. Yet, beyond the exposition of cruelty and systemic flaws, Solomon's memoir is a testament to the enduring human spirit. He recounted the friendships that sustained him, the strategies he developed to maintain his sense of self, and the moments of hope that flickered even in the darkest periods. His musical talent, which had initially lured him into the trap that led to his enslavement, also became a subtle source of identity and occasional respite during his years of labor, symbolizing the persistence of personal culture and skill even under oppressive conditions. By integrating these personal dimensions, Solomon transformed what could have been merely an account of suffering into a narrative of resilience, resourcefulness, and ultimately triumph. The impact of 12 Years a Slave was immediate and profound. Within months of its release, the memoir sold thousands of copies, capturing the attention of Northern audiences and contributing significantly to the abolitionist movement. Solomon's first-hand account offered an unmediated perspective, challenging sanitized or abstract representations of slavery by providing vivid, credible, and deeply human testimony. The book's detailed depictions of physical labor, punishment, psychological strain, and the constant struggle for survival resonated with readers, eliciting both outrage and empathy, and helped to foster a broader understanding of the moral imperative to confront and dismantle the institution of slavery. The narrative also served as a clarion call to activists, legislators, and ordinary citizens alike, demonstrating the urgency and ethical necessity of action to protect human rights and dignity. Solomon's storytelling was deliberate, combining chronological clarity with emotional intensity, ensuring that the memoir was accessible while retaining the depth and complexity of the experiences described. He used personal anecdotes, detailed character studies of masters and fellow enslaved individuals, and precise descriptions of settings and events to transport readers into the lived realities of bondage. By embedding broader social commentary within a compelling narrative framework, he succeeded in making the story not only informative but also engaging, sustaining attention while conveying the weight of the historical and ethical issues at stake. Moreover, the memoir transcended its immediate historical context, offering enduring lessons about justice, perseverance, and the consequences of moral and legal failure. It became a primary reference for scholars, educators, and activists, cementing Solomon Northup's place as both a chronicler of history and a moral witness. His ability to translate personal suffering into a narrative that educated, inspired, and mobilized action exemplifies the power of storytelling as a tool for social change. Ultimately, 12 Years a Slave stands as a monumental achievement in both literature and social history. Solomon Northup's dedication to documenting his ordeal ensured that the realities of slavery could not be forgotten, providing subsequent generations with an unvarnished look at the cruelty, complexity, and human resilience that defined this dark chapter of American history. The memoir's influence continues to this day, reminding readers of the importance of bearing witness, advocating for justice, and honoring the lives and struggles of those who endured oppression while retaining their dignity, courage, and hope. After reclaiming his freedom and documenting his harrowing 12-year ordeal in 12 Years a Slave, Solomon Northup did not retreat into quiet obscurity, nor did he allow the injustice he endured to define the limits of his life. Instead, he transformed his personal experience into a lifelong mission of advocacy, education, and social action, dedicating himself to the abolitionist cause with unwavering determination, understanding that the institution of slavery thrived not only on physical coercion but also on societal ignorance. Solomon made it his mission to ensure that the stories of enslaved people were heard, recorded, and understood by as wide an audience as possible. He embarked on speaking tours across the northern states, sharing his experiences in churches, town halls, and public gatherings, each lecture infused with the urgency and moral clarity of someone who had lived through unimaginable suffering yet emerged committed to justice. His words carried the weight of authenticity, compelling listeners to confront the realities of slavery in ways that abstract arguments or second-hand accounts could never achieve. Through these public engagements, Solomon became a living testament to the strength of the human spirit, demonstrating that even in the aftermath of extreme oppression, it is possible to act with courage, dignity, and purpose. He spoke not only of his personal experiences but also of the broader systemic issues that enabled slavery to persist, educating audiences about the legal loopholes, societal prejudices, and economic incentives that sustained an institution designed to dehumanize millions. By contextualizing his story within the larger social and political framework, Solomon encouraged his listeners to see slavery not as a distant or abstract problem, but as an urgent moral and civic crisis requiring active opposition. His lectures were punctuated with detailed accounts of his interactions with masters, overseers, fellow enslaved people, and allies who helped him along the way, providing a vivid, multi-layered narrative that was at once gripping and deeply instructive. Beyond public speaking, Solomon devoted significant energy to the practical work of aiding fugitive slaves, contributing to the operations of the Underground Railroad and other abolitionist networks. He leveraged his knowledge of slave-holding regions, the dangers faced by escapees, and the methods of slave catchers to guide and protect those seeking freedom, demonstrating both courage and strategic thinking in the face of considerable personal risk. In doing, Solomon not only extended the compassion and support he himself had longed for during his captivity, but he also transformed his painful past into a resource for protecting and empowering others, ensuring that the lessons of his suffering were translated into meaningful action. His involvement in these rescue efforts underscored a fundamental principle: that the moral responsibility of those who survive injustice includes advocating for those who remain vulnerable. Solomon's life after slavery also reflected a deep commitment to moral and civic engagement, as he used his platform to influence public opinion and policy. By participating in abolitionist organizations, collaborating with fellow activists, and contributing to discourse around emancipation and civil rights, he helped to create momentum for broader social change, proving that personal testimony could intersect with organized advocacy to achieve measurable impact. His work served as both inspiration and blueprint for others who sought to confront injustice, showing that the combination of lived experience, eloquent communication, and principled action could shape the trajectory of a movement and leave a lasting imprint on society. The legacy Solomon Northup left behind is remarkable not merely for the suffering he endured, but for the resilience, strategic foresight, and moral courage he displayed in the aftermath of his liberation. His memoir remains a cornerstone of American historical literature, ensuring that the reality of slavery and the strength of those who survived it remains visible to each new generation. His public lectures educated countless individuals, fostering empathy, awareness, and action, while his practical efforts to assist fugitive slaves provided tangible benefits that altered the lives of those he helped. In all these ways, Solomon transformed the trauma of his past into enduring contributions to justice, human dignity, and the collective moral conscience of a nation still grappling with the legacy of slavery. Even today, the story of Solomon Northup stands as a powerful reminder of the human capacity for endurance, courage, and advocacy in the face of unimaginable adversity. It reminds us that suffering, when met with resilience and purpose, can become a force for education, inspiration, and meaningful change. Solomon's life encourages us to bear witness, to act on behalf of those whose voices are suppressed, and to recognize the potential within each individual to contribute to a more just and compassionate society. Thank you so much for watching and joining us on this journey through history. If you found Solomon Northup's story as inspiring and enlightening as we did, please tap the like button and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another episode of captivating historical stories. Your support helps us continue sharing these important narratives with the world. From all of us here, we wish you a peaceful and restful night. Sleep well, and let the courage and resilience of heroes like Solomon Northup inspire your dreams.